Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, brought to you by amsmedia.com, presented by me, Harry Symeou. As ever, we're going to be talking you through some of the latest Arsenal news. Of course, the season is going to resume by the looks of things, and it's not too far away, just a few weeks now, less than 3 weeks before Arsenal will get back underway against Manchester City, and we can't wait. How we've missed football. I know that the circumstances have been horrible and that football is nowhere near as important as people losing their lives and their health and everything. But I'm really excited to see football come back. And I know it isn't going to be the same necessarily, playing games behind closed doors, etc., etc. But some football is better than no football, in my opinion. And I'm really delighted that there is some light at the end of the tunnel for us football fans. Now, let's look at some of the latest Arsenal news. And we're going to start off with a big story today. And this is one doing the rounds. And it's about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who is apparently been offered a contract extension by the club. Now, the original report comes from the French outlet L'Equipe. It says that the 30-year-old has received the offer of a contract extension at the Emirates, and that it's an attempt by Arsenal to ward off the interest in their star striker from a number of people, with PSG being one of the clubs linked. Now, there isn't really any details about how much the deal will be worth, etc., etc. The article, which is relayed by the Daily Mail, goes on to talk about Champions League football and how that may be a serious lure for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. But one thing I will say is, given the current situation, given the fact that many clubs are going to be restricted in what they can spend in comparison to maybe what they would normally do in a summer transfer window, I think we've got a pretty good chance of keeping hold of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. If he buys into what Mikel Arteta is trying to do, if he buys into the contract offer, if the Arsenal are able to offer him what he wants in terms of financial compensation, then I don't see why we can't keep hold of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. You know, his options may be limited given the way things have happened. And that's not to say his options are limited because he's not a great player, because he's a fantastic striker. But you just wonder, don't you, how this COVID-19 will impact some of European football's big hitters in terms of what they can go out and spend. And therefore, will Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, if the offer is right, prefer to stay at Arsenal? Who knows? You know, Mikel Arteta appears to have had a huge impact on some of these players since his arrival. He's really got the buy-in and the belief of that group. And hopefully that has filtered through to Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and fingers crossed we can keep hold of him. So that's the report. L'Equipe are the ones who broke the news initially. As I said, it's been recited or relayed by the Daily Mail. So if you want to check that out in English, please do so. Head over to dailymail.co.uk and you will find the full story on that one. A few other bits and pieces to talk about from the last few days. Now, of course, we haven't done a podcast since the back end of last week. We are bringing you 3 shows a week once again, after we took a little bit of a hiatus because, as I said, I didn't feel there was that much that was worth talking about. And given the way people were struggling and the way things were happening, you know, people being put on furlough, people being ill, people not being able to see their loved ones, it just didn't feel right to come on here every day and talk about transfer rumors that I know full well are nonsense. And, you know, I'm in the business, I'm in the industry. I know how some media outlets have been filling up their quotas, you know, in the last few months or so. And that's not to name anyone in particular, because it's an industry-wide thing. They've had to find stuff to write about. They've had to get creative. They've had to look back at previous events, get a bit nostalgic, etc., etc. But for me, there wasn't really any substance to a lot of those stories, and so I didn't feel it was worth reporting those. So that's why we chose not to. But we're back now, and we're going to talk about some real concrete stories here. Of course, the Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang one, it's from L'Equipe, so I can't hand on heart say that it is entirely accurate. L'Equipe are known as one of those outlets who do jump on a story very quickly, very early, and perhaps without the relevant information and without substantial insight. But, you know, they're reporting it, and the Daily Mail have picked it up. I know that's not saying much either, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this is a story that has legs. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, of course, has 1 year left on his current contract. We've heard from Raul Sanllehi in the past that if players don't sign extensions, they will be sold. So perhaps the next few weeks could be critical in the Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang negotiations. Plus, you've also got to take this into account. If Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has agreed a mega money deal with Arsenal, given that all the staff and the players have gone on a pay cut, given that the way things are and the situation that many people find themselves in their day-to-day lives, would it be right for Arsenal to come out now and announce a mega money deal? Maybe not. So that could play a part as well. So that's the story today. That's the latest. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, according to L'Equipe in France, has been offered a contract extension by the Gunners. Now let's move on to the next point of discussion, and that is the FA Cup. Now, we heard over the weekend that the FA Cup is likely to resume and that it's been provisionally rescheduled with some dates. Those dates are the semi-finals to take place across the weekend of Saturday the 18th and Sunday the 19th of July, with the Emirates FA Cup final to be held on Saturday the 1st of August. Now, of course, this is all subject to the medical advice. This is all subject to the government. This is all subject to all the relevant things being put in place to protect the players and those involved, the broadcasters, everybody. But the FA Cup, for me, was one of the competitions that, I guess with an FA Cup competition, yes, I want to see it decided. Of course I do. I didn't want any of the competitions to go undecided, this season. But I guess I was willing to allow this one to go if it meant that we could get the league finished. Now, from a purely selfish Arsenal perspective, why would I want the league to continue? I think our chances of making the Champions League are very, very very low. It's not impossible, but they're very low in my opinion. But the FA Cup, is a competition we've traditionally done well in, etc., etc. I guess with this one, I would have let it go by the wayside if I was the FA. But if there is a way of playing it, then great, good on them. And I understand why they've decided to go down that route. So as I said, quarterfinals will take place 27th, 28th of June. The semi-finals on the 18th and 19th of July, and the final on the 1st of August. Now, again, subject to everything being okay. That's the way it's going to be. Further information on venues and timings will be announced in due course. That's according to the FA's website and their statement, which you can see on your screens at the moment. And a statement released by Mark Bullingham, the Chief Executive Officer. He said, "We are pleased to agree the provisional restart date for the 2019-20 Emirates FA Cup. The competition has been an integral part of the English football calendar for nearly 150 years, and we'd like to thank the Premier League executive and clubs for their support in scheduling the remaining matches during this unprecedented time. This has been a difficult period for many people, and while this is a positive step, the restart date is dependent on all safety measures being met. The health and well-being of players, staff and supporters remains our priority." Of course, Arsenal scheduled to take on Sheffield United at Bramall Lane in the quarterfinals. The other participants include Leicester City, Chelsea, Newcastle United, Manchester City, Norwich City and Manchester United. So some real big hitters still in the competition this year. I guess, as I've said, I'm okay. I would have been okay with the competition being put to the side for this year. But if it can be played, then why the hell not? It's an opportunity for Arsenal to get some silverware, and it's an opportunity for Mikel Arteta to go to Wembley with his Arsenal, and that's assuming that the games are played there. So why not? Could be a huge confidence boost. Of course, this news came out over the weekend, but we haven't done a podcast since then, so I thought worth sharing my thoughts. Let me know, do you think that it's enough for just the Premier League to resume, or do you think that the FA have taken the right decision, and the government and the authorities, of course, that if possible, they would like to resume the FA Cup and continue this historical competition? Now, if you're in lockdown and you're looking for something to watch, there's a series on Netflix called The English Game. I don't know if anybody's seen it, and it really looks back at the origins of the FA Cup. And talks about the struggles that the working class had in order to get included in football and be given sort of a fair playing ground in which they could compete. So it's a really good series, really interesting. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. Moving on. Now, this isn't news. This is just something I've been thinking about in the last few days. And I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this in the comments section. So I thought I'd raise it. Now, I've spoken to a few Arsenal fans of late, one of them being Dan Potts from Same Old Arsenal, Guns and Yellow Ribbons. I'm sure you've seen him on here before. And we were talking about how he feels about the return of football with no fans. And it's not an opinion that only Dan has. It's an opinion that has been echoed by quite a few people that I've spoken to. They're saying they're disinterested. They're saying they're not bothered about the rest of the season. What's the point in playing it? It's a mess. There's not going to be any fans. Football without fans is nothing, etc., etc. What I want to know from you guys, and I've been thinking about this, of course, Mikel Arteta has come into this job and we're all going to give him time. We're all willing to accept that he's got a massive job on his hands. Transfer funds are not likely to be anything significant in this summer. And that's not just because of the position that Arsenal find themselves in, but that's also because of the position that football finds itself in, given this health crisis and the impact and the knock-on effect that has had. But does the disinterest from some of the supporters, I guess, take the pressure off Mikel Arteta? Does it give him the remainder of the season to focus on implementing the things that he wants to implement? And I know he was going to get the time anyway. Nobody's saying that Mikel Arteta was going to be sacked between now and the end of the season. But does it just get a few people off of his back, ease the pressure on him a little bit and allow him to focus on what he wants to embed and coaching this team without the full pressures that he would normally experience in full stadiums, etc.? Apologies. Hay fever getting the better of me. Does Mikel Arteta have a slight advantage here in the sense that he can do it with a little bit less pressure? And again, Ray in the comments says, I'm interested in the PL coming back. I am as well, my friend. But I know there are a lot of people who, I'm not going to say are totally disinterested, but they're looking at the remainder of this season as just something that we have to do for the integrity of the competition rather than it being something that they're buzzing about. And given the situation some people find themselves in their personal lives with work, etc., having lost loved ones due to COVID-19, I can understand why there would be a lot who are not as upbeat about the return of the season as others. And that's totally understandable. But I guess what I'm trying to say is Mikel Arteta at a slight advantage here because the pressure is probably completely gone? Where there was very little, I think now it's probably completely gone. And I think that whatever happens between now and the end of the season, it'll be very easy to look back and say, yeah, but we had the disruption. Yes, he couldn't have his players on the training ground for a long time, etc., etc. So is this something that Mikel Arteta can use to his advantage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, moving on to our next topic of discussion, we're going to talk about a signing that Arsenal have reportedly completed. Now, we've heard a lot of this in the press, but of course, there hasn't been any official confirmation from the club. And that is that Arsenal have completed the signing of the Norwegian teenager, George Luiz. That's according to a director at one of his former clubs. And the 19-year-old apparently impressed during a trial at Arsenal during March before the coronavirus pandemic took place. And apparently he's now set to join the club on a free transfer. Now, I'm not very, clued up on George Luiz. I've even reached out to a few journalists in a bid to try and get them onto this show to give you guys some insight into George Luiz. And a big shout out to the Gooner Talk because they've done a really insightful episode on George Luiz. But the reality is that not many people know an awful lot about this guy. He's been knocking around in the lower leagues in Norway. He's obviously impressed at Arsenal. Mikel Arteta has obviously been impressed with him, and that's great and that's fine. I'm all for making the signing. It's very, I guess the risk is very small. The reward could be incredible. If he was to develop and he was to play a part in this squad, considering we've signed him on a free transfer, plenty of years for him to develop as well. So, Arsenal have apparently signed George Luiz. But again, got to stress, we haven't had any official confirmation from the club on that. But again, it could go back to that point that I made about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang a little earlier on. Is this the right time to be making announcements? Not sure. And perhaps they're sensitive to that fact. Sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of people who are worried about finances at the moment, sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of issues at Arsenal Football Club that need resolving. and, having asked the players maybe to take that pay cut, it probably sounds a little bit silly, but maybe they don't exactly want to go out now, at least until football resumes again, and they know that everything's okay, and start making these announcements. So we understand that the deal is done, but again, as I've got to stress, no official confirmation that George Lewis is an Arsenal player. Let's move on. And we're going to talk a little bit about David Luiz. Now, David Luiz was the subject of much conversation on the last episode. We spoke about the fact that Arsenal had reportedly only signed him on a one-year deal, which was contrary to the information we received when the deal actually went through. We heard from various outlets that it was a 2-year deal. Having looked back, having gone through the archives, Arsenal didn't actually specify how long the deal was. So it could be true that it is just a 1-year deal. That's the information that The Athletic have come up with. That's the information that Sky Sports have come up with. Some really reliable sources have reported this, so there's a good chance that it's true. And then we had a report from The Athletic, which, as you can see on your screens, has been relayed by The Sun, saying that David Luiz cost Arsenal £24 million for just that one season. And that is a combination of the transfer fee, of his wages, and of course of the fees that were paid to intermediaries in order to get this deal over the line. Now, I'll emphasize what I said on the last episode. Do I think David Luiz has been great? No. But given the situation we find ourselves in terms of our central defensive options, I would keep David Luiz personally. Again, feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but for me, David Luiz still has something to offer to this team. And maybe it's not necessarily his incredible ability as a defender, but it's his confidence. It's his willingness to put his arm around some of the younger players and help them out. And I think that is invaluable at a time when Arsenal are trying to rebuild. And Arsenal are clearly going down that route with the likes of Bukayo Saka, with Gabriel Martinelli and various others who are looking to break through and hold places in the squad permanently. So on that basis, I'm not dead against David Luiz staying. But then again, when you think about the £24 million, it does sound excessive. However, what you've got to think about here is you're not going to pay the transfer fee again. So that automatically takes £8 million off of this £24 million figure that's being banded about. I'm not sure what the intermediaries would take from I guess, an extension of the current deal, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be as much as what they took the first time around, which was apparently around about £6 million, which is crazy when you think that's just £2 million shy of the initial transfer fee. So is it going to cost Arsenal that much to keep David Luiz for another year? You're not going to have the transfer fee. You're going to still have to pay his wages, etc., etc. But I just think you've got to weigh up the options here. And if Arsenal aren't in a position to go out and sign a top central defender and improve on the remainder of the options that we have available to us, then I would keep him. That's honestly my view. Again, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll come back to some of your comments before we wrap up this live episode. But that's where I stand on David Luiz. And then it's then come to light that Kia Joorabchian, of course, David Luiz's advisor, who's said to have a really, really good relationship with Raul Sanllehi, has said that it's highly likely that David Luiz will stay, in which case I think Arsenal probably have weighed up their options. And there is an argument that the whole COVID-19 thing has changed Arsenal's plans in the transfer market. Perhaps they were looking to go out and bring in another centre-half, and that's why negotiations hadn't taken place up until this point. But I'm sure they'll be looking out in the market now and thinking it's going to be a very, very difficult marketplace this summer because of everything that's going on. And therefore, are we just better served keeping the player that we know, keeping what we've got, and not forking out a transfer fee on someone else? I don't know. Just my view. Again, it's all opinions at this moment in time. It's all paper talk. But that's where I stand on that. Let's go over to some of your live comments. Omar, big hello to Omar, regular viewer and listener of the podcast. He says, 24 million on David Luiz, that's a disgrace. It certainly sounds like a lot of money, my friend, and particularly when you take into account that that was paid just to secure him for one season. But at the time, Arsenal were desperate. And I think you have to take that into account. You know, Arsenal were desperate. Laurent Koscielny had sprung a surprise on the club and said he was going. Arsenal desperately needed to bring in a centre-half, and David Luiz was available. And I think Arsenal were forced into panicking. You know, and I think that's the situation we found ourselves in. I think we've done it time and time again in recent years where we've had to panic buy at the end of transfer windows, and we've not necessarily got the players that we wanted, and we've just had to make do with them, and put up with them. Let's see what else we've got here. Maximus, in response to, I guess, when I was talking about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, says, our fans love deluding themselves. Every top player leaves this club. He wants to go, and if anyone thinks otherwise, they're on drugs. Maximus, I'm not denying that there are more attractive propositions in world football right now for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Of course there are. We're talking about a striker who won the Golden Boot in the Premier League, one of the most competitive leagues in world football. Of course there are options for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, but I think you've missed my point, which is the landscape has changed. Coronavirus has knocked everybody for six. There are clubs who haven't had gate receipts for months. There are leagues, for example, in France, where the league's just been decided. How does that affect someone like PSG in the transfer market, who are already under the microscope for the way they do financial fair play? So that's my point. It's not that there aren't clubs out there, that don't want Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. It's that the landscape has changed, and we may be able to cash in on this and take advantage of it. And perhaps that uncertainty will prevent Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang forcing a move if the right deal is on the table for him in North London. Let's have a look at some more comments as I just scroll through. Big hello to Simpy, who says, big up, welcome back to the show, my friend. A message from Jibs, who's donated via the super chat function. Jibs, thank you so much, mate. Really, really appreciate that. He says, R.I.P. George Floyd, R.I.P. Reyes. On this day, 2019. Absolutely. Rest in peace, George Floyd, and really sad scenes coming out of the States at the moment. And I guess, you know, people are making their point. You know, some of them are doing it in the right way. Some of them are not. But this is years and years of build-up, which has led to these people taking such extreme action. And I have a lot of sympathy for them. And I also have sympathy for those whose shops and stuff are being looted and they have no part to play in this entire scenario. Something that needs to be dealt with ASAP. But I guess those doing what they're doing feel like this is the only way to get their message across. And that's sad that we've gotten to that point. But we certainly have gotten to that point, and things need to change big time. So hopefully this can be a wake-up call. And of course, my condolences go out to all that knew or were related to George Floyd, because that was a brutal way to lose your life. And that police officer, for me, I think he's lucky there's no death penalty in that state, because for me, you know, that's just completely unacceptable. And when people in the law are abusing their power in that way, what hope does the normal person have? It's ridiculous. Horrible, horrible scenes. And fingers crossed, at least some good change can come out of it at the very least. Let's see what else we've got here in terms of your comments. Ray Anderson says, Luiz can sign another year for less wages to put his hand around the youngsters that are there. Martinelli, Saka and Tierney has all said that he has really helped them. Absolutely, emphasizing the point I made earlier on about the impact and the influence that David Luiz has on the squad. Big thank you to Jibs once again for his donation. He says, well said, Harry. Yeah, that brings us to the end of another episode, another live episode. And bear with me, we're going to get back into the swing of these. You know, it's been a while since we've been doing these shows. Once the football comes back, we'll be back to our normal format, which will be a Monday or Tuesday review show, where we'll be looking back on the game in good detail. We're bringing you the Social Club on a Wednesday, which is, of course, our general football chat, where we bring in guests from the football world to talk about their experiences and their views on various topics, not necessarily just within the Arsenal. And then on Thursdays or Fridays, depending again on when Arsenal are playing, we'll be bringing you in-depth preview shows. So really, really look forward to that. Just rounding up the news at the moment, because, as I said, there is no action to delve into. And you know, if you've been following this podcast for a while, that is what I love doing. And I love looking at action rather than talking about transfer stories, rather than talking about rumors. But over the last few days, things have started to get moving on the news front, and there are some topics a little more worth discussing now than we had a few weeks ago. So I want to finish off by saying thank you to everybody who's tuned in, to those of you watching us live, to those of you that are going to watch this back later, and to those of you who are going to tune in via the audio version. It's greatly appreciated. We'll be back very, very soon with more. So until then, take care of yourselves, and most importantly, stay safe. Cheers.